It's time for another edition of Talk Back. It's episode 301. That's right. It's episode 1 of season 3. I am one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and with me is Justin Gay, your host and director of content, with a full lineup of NFL, NBA, and a little bit of Major League Baseball. In segment 1, we've got contract holdouts. Ezekiel Elliott, Melvin Gordon. Michael Thomas was one of them, but he got his. We'll get into a little bit more of the conversation regarding money and should these players be asking for more before their current deals are up. Then we've got to talk about injuries. AJ Green goes down. Some of the Giants wide receivers go down. Does that change their plans with Eli? Then what should the Chiefs do long term with Tyreek Hill? Does the Michael Thomas deal change anything with Tyreek Hill? The Chiefs are in a great position to do a lot of good things with Patrick Mahomes and the other weapons they have, but Tyreek Hill is a huge piece of that. As we move it over to segment 2, we'll hit the hardwood. Is LeBron James becoming a little bit too much like LeVar Ball, or is he just a good father? The Major League Baseball races are heating up. Free agency and the trade deadline are not as exciting as maybe the league had hoped. Do the Nationals have a chance to win the division, and do the Phillies have buyer's remorse? We've got all of that and more on episode 1 of season 3 of Talk Back. Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show. All right, we are back. It is episode 1, season 3. Eric, we made it. Season 3, and we get to kick it off with some NFL, and maybe not the best of news if you're a Dallas Cowboy fan or if you're a fan of the LA Chargers. You're probably a lot happier if you're a fan of the New Orleans Saints. Mm-hmm. And the explanation behind that is, first, it was Melvin Gordon saying he wanted a new deal. He then was joined by Zeke Elliott, who said he wanted a new deal. And Michael Thomas joined them on the holdout brigade. He wanted a new deal, but Eric, he got his. He got paid. 5-year extension for Michael Thomas, $100 million, $61 million of that guaranteed. So, Eric, I got to ask you this to kick the show off here. Melvin Gordon is sitting there. Zeke Elliott is sitting there. They watched Todd Gurley get paid last year. Now they watch Michael Thomas's holdout, even though it was brief, seemed to work. So do they feel like their tactic is going to work? Are they going to just ride this thing out till they get new deals? And what should the teams do at this point?
It's going to be tough for both of them, especially coming out of the positions that they're coming at it from, being running backs. And a guy like Melvin Gordon, who has been on and off the field a number of times in his career, so much promise from him. I know Zeke Elliott has, especially in his rookie year when him and Dak just lit the world on fire, those guys have a lot of promise. But again, we saw with Le'Veon Bell that the running back position is something that the league and especially the GMs of franchises that have a lot of movement toward the top of their divisions aren't willing to sell the farm for one guy, especially out of the backfield. So I think they're in a bit of a different position than a guy like Michael Thomas, who could go on and have a 10 or 12-year career fairly easily, fairly commonly. And I think that's what the Saints are obviously looking at this point. But the Cowboys, as we talked about last week, have gone through guys like DeMarco Murray, Alfred Morris, and others, and thinking that Zeke may not be the guy that they want to hitch their wagon to for 5 or 6 years at a cost that may be detrimental to them down the road. Now, I'll tell you the guys who are really going to be happy about the Michael Thomas deal. It's Tyreek Hill and Julio Jones. Them as wide receivers have a leg to stand on when it comes to holding out or potentially asking for more and having a better chance of getting it. But Justin, I sit on the side of the fence where these running backs are running a huge risk in their careers, whether it be through public opinion, the court of public opinion, or the public opinion of their own locker room, and the fact that they could waste time. Anytime you're like Le'Veon Bell losing a whole season out of your career to hold out, I just think that's a big risk for a running back.
It's hard to try to put these guys in the same box as Le'Veon Bell, or even looking at the NBA, what we talked about with Anthony Davis and his holdout and trade demand. I think the difference for me, look, we crushed Anthony Davis on this show for wanting out of town and this whole, empowering players. But I feel like he signed his deal. He signed a 5-year deal. He was getting over, $30 million a year from New Orleans, and he still wanted out. I feel like with Zeke Elliott, Melvin Gordon, these guys who got taken high first-round picks or middle of the first round, they're slotted, and their future is basically locked down for 5 years. They don't get to just hit the market. And we've seen a lot of times with these running backs, especially when they get the usage a guy like Zeke Elliott has gotten early in his career, where he's leading the league in rushing attempts, and really the only time he's off the field is if he's done something stupid enough to get himself removed by suspension by Goodell, and they're just running him into the ground. And he probably looks at what happened to DeMarco Murray and says, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be making $2.9 million this year and next year, and then I don't even get a second contract because by year 5, I'm on such a decline that I can't get any money. So as much as I pounded the table last year of Le'Veon Bell, that's because he had $14 million sitting on there. And yeah, he spun it into $30 million or so guaranteed, but who's to say he couldn't have made 14 plus 30? That was my argument with him. With Zeke, the money's not there. The 5th year, yeah, there'll be more money, but he's got multiple years to get to that point. So I really side with Zeke on this one. With the way that they've used him, I don't mind him sitting out because he's underpaid, but his window is so small, Eric. I think that's my issue with it, where it's not an issue with the Cowboys. It's what we've talked about on here last week, and we talked about even last offseason, where these running backs, especially guys that are second round and later, where they're locked into a really cheap deal where they're getting about anywhere from $2 to $4 million over the course of that, and they're getting run into the ground. A guy like Alvin Kamara comes to mind, a guy that was middle of the pack in terms of round. When those guys' deal is up, they really got to get paid on that next contract because that's it. Very rarely do these guys survive. And what happened to Todd Gurley is an eye-opener, Eric, I think, for all of them, where they go, we've got to get our money because we don't know when it's going to stop, when the ability to get to that next contract may not even come up. This is not the NBA. These guys are not on fully guaranteed deals. Even Todd Gurley's deal, as good as it looks, there's a certain amount of it that he will never see because it's not guaranteed. And who only knows the details in there from workout bonuses and injury guarantees and all that stuff, roster bonuses, if he's still there, that some of that stuff may not be there. So I got to side with Zeke on this. Now, I think Zeke has more of a leg to stand on than Melvin Gordon because the Chargers had Melvin Gordon out of the lineup for 4 games last year. And guess what? They were 4-0. So that's going to hurt him in terms of thinking that he's going to get top 5 money, where they've said, hey, we'll give you a Devontae Freeman-like deal, that 5-year, $40 million and a portion guaranteed of that. But he wants more of the David Johnson 3-year, $39 million. And they're like, that's too much average money per year. Where at least Zeke is such a critical part of the Cowboys offense. And you look at what's behind them and you look at their record when he's off the field, Eric, it's horrible. The problem for the Cowboys, though, is they got a lot of mouths to feed. They got Dak coming up. They're going to have to pay Amari Cooper. They just paid DeMarcus Lawrence. Byron Jones is going to be coming up. This isn't the NBA. There's no luxury tax that you can go into. This is a hardened cap. And you start to wonder which of those Cowboy guys is going to be the odd man out. So for me, Eric, I understand Zeke's position, but the Cowboys are just in a bad spot where everybody is due at the same time. And it's just bad timing for them because it seems like they're going to have to, somebody's not getting paid here. And I just don't know who it is. So if you're running the Cowboys, which of those guys do you feel is the one that you'd be most likely to let go?
Well, that's a great question because I think for me, it is actually Zeke Elliott. But I'll tell you why. If you look at a guy like John Dorsey, you look at what he did with the Chiefs, the value that he puts on the hierarchy or sort of his pyramid of needs on a football team, running back is actually fairly low. You look at where he drafted a guy like Kareem Hunt. You look at where he put a guy like Damian Williams, who came in and backed up Kareem Hunt when he went out with his issues last year. So you look at what he did with the Browns now that he's there. And when he had the opportunity to draft a guy like Saquon Barkley, a lot of people who knew John Dorsey and knew of his history with the Chiefs and what his belief system is about running backs, they knew that he never would take Saquon Barkley that high in the draft. And I think that's the philosophy that a lot of these running backs are fighting against right now. Because, look, I said last year that I do sort of agree with a Le'Veon Bell in terms of the philosophy that he's approaching it from, that we are a certain percentage of this team's offense. We are valued the same on field production wise as a wide receiver, but we are not paid the same and we don't have the same longevity. And so we shouldn't be penalized for that. I do get that. And I do actually agree with that, so that there needs to be some sort of protection for these superstar running backs that really have a low shelf life, but the shelf life that they do give you is very high to the team. The problem is you don't have 32 running backs like that. So this isn't going to be an institutional change the way that they want it to be, they being the running backs. Because, yeah, Zeke Elliott is a good running back. A guy like Melvin Gordon is a decent running back, and a guy like Le'Veon Bell was a great running back with Pittsburgh. But when you start going outside of that, I mean, a guy like Duke Johnson isn't going to stand there and demand things, because he's just not on the same echelon that those guys are on.
He can't even force him a trade.
That's what I'm saying.
He wants to be traded, can't get it.
They want institutional changes of how they're paid, and it's just not going to happen, because it's not the same as having a great point guard on every team of the NBA. It's not the same as having a great to very good quarterback on every team of the NFL. However, I do think that there are changes that need to be made in terms of profit sharing and revenue sharing amongst the positions that bring in the profit in the NFL. And I think what you're going to find is that in the next CBA, there is going to be a lot more stress and a lot more strife amongst the players and the owners about how contracts are done and how they're written amongst different positions. I think this is going to be a big deal in the NFL. And Justin, I honestly think one of the things that would solve it is if the NFL went to a more guaranteed money contract like an NBA, like an MLB. They can work out the details on the hard cap and all that stuff. But I do feel like one of the things that kind of bugs me about the NFL is the demands that they're putting on their body, the risk of injury, and the fact that really the teams have no more loyalty to them than they have to the team. And so I do understand from a Le'Veon perspective, from a guy who's going to hold out like a Zeke Elliott, to say that, you know, look, I mean, this could all be over for me in a year or two. So I need money that's commensurate with the amount of value that I brought to the Dallas Cowboys over the last 3 years.
I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, look, I brought from the point that I don't blame Zeke. I understand, but I understand that Dallas's standpoint of not wanting to pay him and why they're not close right now. As we record this here this week on Wednesday night, that the story broke right before we came on air that they're not close to, according to a source, on anything. Years guaranteed money, nothing. And I understand that from Dallas is because I agree with you. Dallas has spent a ton of money on their offensive line. So you start to think about, okay, if they just go out and draft a decent running back, couldn't he perform close to what Zeke has? The problem for Dallas is they've tried to use guys like Alfred Morris. They've never really had, and obviously when you draft a running back as early as they did in the first round, you're probably not going to want to spend another pick on one. But running back seems to be the most easiest to transition to in the NFL. Every year we see multiple guys come out of nowhere, and you always find them because they're the guy in like week 4 or 5 that you're like jamming the waiver wire in fantasy football to try to get this guy because you're like, where did he come from? And how does he keep getting 100-yard games? We see it all the time. You don't see that with the quarterback position nearly enough. And wide receivers have become hit or miss, where guys, they may not get it at first, or it takes them 2 or 3 years to come in, where if a running back understands protections, he's a 3-down back right off the bat. I mean, you look at what Saquon did last year. The guy looked like he had been in the league for 5 or 6 years. He just came right in and picked it up. And as the year progressed, he just got better and better and better. But the Giants in a couple of years, they'll have the same issues to deal with. But yeah, and where's Dallas going to go find another quarterback? Now, I don't think Dak Prescott's worth $30 to $32 million a year. I think that's insane to pay that kind of money for a guy, again, a guy that's had a very good running back, who has one of the best, if